Well, death, taxes, and the West Virginia Mountaineers getting ranked and then losing to follow up getting ranked. As we are speaking to you here on the heels of West Virginia's latest loss, an upset loss at home, a nightcap to Arizona State, and now the state of Arizona in general feels like they cost West Virginia rankings. West Virginia had a big victory, a big staple win over Iowa State on Jerry West Day at home. 4 ranked wins, 3 top 10 wins. DeVries Coach of the Year, Javon Small talked about as Big 12 Player of the Year, and they followed up with really one of their worst performances of the entire season, certainly in a while, with that loss to ASU. Mike Asti, Cody Nespor here, Mountaineer Report, WVU Sports Now. We are going to make this an all basketball edition of the show, talk about what the hell happened, talk about where this program and team is going to go from here, and the reality of the situation, because the sky is not completely falling off of one loss based on the wins they have and the overall resume they have built. So, Cody, you braved the weather and you braved your lack of sleep to cover the game for us. I guess simply put, what the hell did happen? Darren DeVries isn't making any excuses. It looked like Small maybe was a little banged up in the game. He also was very off shooting, and ASU put up a great defensive effort, but that's a struggling ASU team. And on the broadcast, they kept talking about how really good of a team they really are and throw away the record. But everyone else was beating them. West Virginia did not. And maybe there was a hangover from what happened on Saturday when we were both there, but what the hell happened in the loss to ASU?
Yeah, I think Arizona State just came in and very, very simply, they came in and they were the more physical team. They were the more tougher team. And they did what we've seen WVU do to teams all year is they pushed them around on defense. They got their hand on the ball constantly. And you know, what WVU has done to guards all year, they did to Javon Small, where even if they weren't going to double team him, they jumped out in front for a second just to make him double think. They reached at him constantly. They raked at him constantly, which is what we see West Virginia do against everybody. Arizona State came in and you know, credit to them, they have the roster for it, right? They've got some big guys, some strong guys.
Yeah.
And they came in with that game plan, and they did a great job with it of just bump and rake and poke and make life difficult. And West Virginia just couldn't handle it offensively. Their half-court offense was terrible. They only scored, you know, off turnovers or in transition. You know, even when they got some open shots, they missed them by and large. But I think this was a really simple game. Arizona State came in and they played a little bit of bully ball, and West Virginia is not used to being on the other side of that.
It literally looked like you're watching 1990s NBA basketball. It looked like Arizona State was doing what you're saying. Bully ball, we're the bigger team. We're going to neutralize Javon Small. A similar game plan a little bit to what Pitt tried to do early in the season. Pitt doesn't have the size of ASU, but they tried to clog the lanes. They tried to take out the best player, who at the time they believed to be Tucker DeVries, and really question West Virginia's depth. And while we all knew the depth was a problem and has been a problem, it hasn't really been an issue win-loss wise because they're still getting big victories. It definitely seemed to be an issue there. And as much as Darren DeVries kept saying before and after the game that he told the guys, don't have a hangover, a big win's nice, but let's not have a hangover. You got to keep this moving to get where you want to be. It almost felt like a little bit early on that maybe they did have a hangover. They appeared sluggish early on. They appeared like they couldn't handle what Arizona State was going to put forth. Where does this leave you concern-wise moving forward? Because this is clearly a game plan. Not every team is that big, but this is clearly a game plan that if you take Javon Small out of it, and if he goes 1 or 2 for 14 and has 14 points, what was it, 1 for 11, something like that?
Yeah,
I mean, he was 0 for so he was 0 for his first handful. He couldn't even get shots off. I think he only had 6 shots in going into the last 10 minutes of the game. He tried to come alive a little bit at the end, and then, of course, left briefly with what people thought was an injury. But he can't do it alone. And if you take him out and the depth is a problem and you don't get Tucker back, and again, that's where things are leaning, where's the concern meter now, having seen this result? There's still a lot of season left. If they start stacking losses, this fantastic historic season could still go in the toilet.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think you mentioned like this might be the blueprint. I think it is, but I think Arizona made this blueprint last week, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah,
Because
true.
they did the same thing where they came in and they were the more physical team and they pushed WVU a lot. I mean, I think you and I basically talked about the same stuff after that loss.
Yeah.
Arizona came in, they had the size, they did basically exactly this.
Most Big
I
12 teams do. That was the concern
yeah,
going into the season, that West Virginia is undersized for the Big 12. That
yeah,
literally was the discussion,
and
and we're
that
seeing it in the losses at least.
yeah, and that issue, we talked about that a lot at the beginning of the year. That issue hasn't come up recently.
Yeah.
But these teams like Arizona, Arizona State, they're bigger, they're stronger. Like Houston, even though that was a loss, this wasn't the issue, right? Because Houston's not built like that.
Yeah.
Houston is a skill team,
Mhm.
and they're just more talented.
Yeah,
But
they're
then
just
you
so
ask,
strong.
like, and Arizona's a good team too. But you ask, like, how does an Arizona State that isn't very good and hasn't been playing very good, how do they come in? They like I said, they just kind of have the roster for it.
Yeah.
And you look at somebody like, that Colorado game, they're on a similar level to Arizona State. Colorado isn't built like that, and they couldn't do that, and so it didn't bother West Virginia. And we've seen a lot of teams I like try to do this, try to double team Javon Small, try to make like life difficult. Iowa State tried to do that, and it didn't bother them because that's just not how their roster is constructed.
Right. Right.
And so it's not even like it's almost as if the quality of the opponent doesn't matter. It's all about, are they big and strong and tough enough to match West Virginia? And if they are, there's going to be big problems. Even if it's like Arizona State's not been playing well since conference.
No, they look like yeah. If you just watch that game against West Virginia and hear the national commentary, you would absolutely think they're a tournament lock, but they are
Yeah.
absolutely still not likely to get in at this
So
point unless they really go on a run.
so that's that would be my only concern, and it's
Yeah.
I don't know how many teams in the Big 12 have the personnel to do this, but like if you're talking about getting into the tournament, hey, a lot of teams in the tournament are big and strong, and
Right.
aren't going to get pushed around. And it's
Right.
I don't like this. Is this the blueprint how to beat West Virginia? Yes, but this isn't new, and it's not a blueprint
Sure.
that's going to be easy to follow for every team out there.
Not every team can do the blueprint, even though this is the
Right,
blueprint.
exactly.
Right.
And if they
And
try, like
yeah.
Arizona State tried to double team Javon in that whole second half, Javon just worked through it, right? There was that one great play where he spun through two defenders and hit a shot at the end of the
He had
clock.
some moments. Yeah, he tried to put his cape back on. 100%.
That's what he's been able to do.
Yeah.
But it's just they run into a team like this in the struggle. Like it's very like West Virginia, and DeVries says this all the time. West Virginia wants to play one style of basketball, and if they can't, they're not any good.
But if they can beat anybody.
Yes,
If
absolutely.
they can, if they can play that style of basketball somehow and they get the matchups to be right, that's a dark horse Elite Eight run. But if they run into an Arizona State, even if maybe they feel like they have the more talented individual players who are going to get more individually recognized, Arizona State has the personnel to do the blueprint. Not every team can. That's 100% really the analysis from this game. They did put forth a blueprint they perfectly can do. If Arizona State plays West Virginia every game, they probably are absolutely are making a run in March. They just don't have a personnel that can beat as many other teams as West Virginia can, and that's why they've been tripped up. But that style worked to ruin things for the Mountaineers. Would you say that Javon Small either more so ran out of gas / maybe got banged up and hurt? He obviously didn't leave the game to where he didn't return, but he did have a brief spurt where it was thought of he wasn't going to come back. Or would you say it was just a bad day at the office and he was just quote unquote off? Because the numbers say he was off, but he also looked banged up, and hell, he did carry them at the end to a big victory over Iowa State. So it could be fair to say he's exhausted as well.
Yeah. I'm sure he was banged up. like, and I hate to repeat myself, that was an extremely physical game. I mean,
Yeah,
like, he's a
100%.
physical player. He scores a lot of his layups through contact.
Yeah.
But even this was a game where, like I said, even when he was just handling the ball in the perimeter, he was getting slapped at
To
and
bigger
bumped
guys, bigger guys
and
hitting him too.
everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was going into the lane and getting knocked down and
Yeah.
knocked to the floor. So I'm 100% sure he was, hurting at least a little bit. Maybe, it's not like he sprained his ankle, but I'm sure he was in some pain. I'm sure he was beat up. Um, and that's I made note of it. They were down 10 with 6 minutes left, and he was sitting on the bench. And
Yeah, yeah.
that's like, he usually never sits in the second half, let alone
That's
in a situation like
that's
that. So,
yeah, and maybe you know more having been there, but that's where it was discussed that he maybe was hurt. There, people were
yeah,
wondering whether or not he was hurt, and then all of a sudden during that conversation, he then appeared and was checking him back into the
yeah,
game. But it almost led us down that path that maybe he got too banged up. This wasn't his night. And honestly, Cody, from Jump Street, and it kind of feels like you felt this way too. It felt very early on that Small was going to be off, the style was not going to work, and that the blueprint was there to beat them, and they were going to lose. A minute in, I was like, this is not going to work out well.
yeah.
Unless somehow Small can hit out. The only way to stop what Arizona State was trying to do was if West Virginia would drill threes. They had to drill threes on the outside of the arc. And once they were not hitting those shots, and even whenever they would get momentum, Arizona State would then come and go through their lane and get an easy layup that you and I
Mhm,
might have been able to put home.
yeah,
Sometimes not even contested, sometimes by themselves.
mhm,
They got multiple runs down the court. That all felt like an Arizona State victory, no matter what the records say. But so, are you more on the banged up side, like to next game against Kansas State, Javon Small could throw up 22, or do you think that was just a bad night where he's off and maybe he can't give you 19 points on an average and 20 points in wins every single night without a number 2 co-star?
yeah.
Eventually the argument is eventually that could catch up to you, even though he had been doing it up to this point. That's hard to do and be a good team.
Um, no, I think it was just a situation like he needed a blow at the end of the game.
Okay.
Like they needed to go on a run, and he was tired, which is, he averages 36 minutes a night. So it's weird to say
Yeah,
that.
that's what I
Um,
mean.
but I do think it was just DeVries saying, like, if I can get Javon out of the game for a minute or two,
Yeah.
maybe that'll give him enough energy and we can go on this run late.
Mhm.
Because like he didn't show, like he wasn't limping, or he didn't, like, I forget what game it was. There was a game recently where he, like, very obviously hurt his right wrist, but played through it. Like there was none of that tonight. I
Okay.
just think I just think he needed a blow. Like that was the last. I mean, they went into a full court press for the first time. They put Hansberry and Andre out there
Yeah.
together for a little bit.
He's impressed
Like this,
Virginia. That was old school. Yeah,
like this
100%.
was just very much like, hey, we're down, we're desperate, we got to throw everything at the wall. And one of the things they tried was like, let's get Javon off the court for a minute to rest up and see maybe he comes back and
Yeah.
he's energized. Um, but no, I mean, if he comes out at Kansas State and drops 22 and plays, 38 minutes, that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, and it could be also, regardless of how banged up he is and exhausted he is, which I'm sure both are true, that Arizona State, again, was almost a kryptonite for Small
Yeah,
because he's going to be dealing with so much traffic in the lane. There's no way he can get easy shots against what
right.
Arizona State was doing. So if he misses the outside shots, they're not going to give him anything easy to go get a basket and start feeling yourself. That's just not going to happen. Cody Nespor, Mike Asti here, Mountaineer Report. Available everywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, Google Play, of course, here on YouTube. Hit the notification bell. West Virginia did lose to Arizona State, but again, the resume is still overall really, really good. The staple wins are there. The overall wins and that pace is there. The analytic rankings are improving. Granted, not exactly where you want them to be, but going into the Arizona State game, the conversation outside of about the individuals and DeVries and Small was that they basically are an NCAA tournament lock, no matter what, unless things really fall off the map. But in all reality, they're going to be playing in March. Looking at the schedule in front of this team, and that also has Houston, which could be another loss, but maybe they avenge it. Maybe they avenge it, and that would be another staple victory. Of course, that would be insane to have another one, a top 10 win. Where you get into territory of being the only team in program history to ever do that, and they're already one of a couple to do this. Do you still feel like they're a tournament lock? And I don't mean that if the tournament started today, but the way they're playing the schedule in front, figuring Tucker's not coming back and Small is going to be carrying the load, do you still feel like they're going to be able to have the overall resume, do enough, have everything fall in line for them to eventually be in March Madness?
Yeah, and it goes back to the schedule. Like the first half of their conference schedule is so much harder than the second half.
Yeah.
Like it just is. The quality of teams. And really, so after that, after this next Houston game, like it, I, it, I'm not saying they should win every game and walk away with it. But there's not a lot of those teams that you're afraid of, like you're afraid of Houston or like you're afraid of Kansas or
Sure.
I shouldn't say afraid, but you know kind of what I mean.
They won't like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're not afraid of anybody.
But like so like as long as they're like okay going into February, and there's basically no way they're not going to be right. There's only 2 games left, but they've got really strong positioning in February, and the February schedule is really favorable. And you figure even if they go out and I don't want to say split all of those last 10 games or whatever, but like even if they lose a couple of them or something, you project ahead, they're going to finish with 18, 19, 20 wins with 3 top 10 wins. Like the resume's there, they're high enough in the computers now. Like without total collapse, it's hard to put them on the outside looking in. When you're projecting out.
Yeah, and we bring this up all the time, but Huggins' last tournament season, 17 wins. Analytics were a little bit better, but now they're getting close to being similar, and obviously both in the same conference and didn't have the staple wins, and they did get in. It's a different year, different field, necessarily doesn't connect to this, and the metrics have been a little confusing this year. Obviously, they're still well behind teams that they did beat, and I think part of it is everyone's a little confused on how the hell they were able to win those games. But I do think the resume is there, and really to paint your picture, Cody, without running through this whole schedule and reading it all, Kansas State coming up next, and then Houston, and Houston obviously is the big deal. They win that. They're absolutely a lock, but even if they don't, and you have 2 losses to a top 10 team in Houston, which they were figured to lose both going in, so that wouldn't be that horrible. They literally do not play another ranked team according to the current Associated Press poll the rest of the season.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they are currently ranked 23rd. I think it's fair to say, like what happened last time, they're likely falling out of it. We'll see what happens here against Kansas State. They're going to maybe have to mollywop Kansas State to have an argument, but likely falling out. But they don't play anyone else who's currently in, and some teams could move around and maybe get ranked by that point. And you do have Cincinnati and Baylor and some quality opponents in there. TCU always get coached up, so you never know. And if you lose to Arizona State, I mean, it's hard to analyze every single matchup. We're obviously covering West Virginia more than the conference. So going into Arizona State, they were favored. And then you start watching the game thinking, this is the blueprint. This is the team that could easily beat them, and they do. So maybe something like that will unfold when we get to those games. But I think we talked about this a couple of shows ago. I think you may even ask me what the win total bar is. I think, if they get to 18 wins, I think they're absolutely a lock to get in. And that allows you to split the rest of the schedule. So that wouldn't even be good. I mean, if you do that, I think they would likely be talked about as a big disappointment and likely be a one and done. But I think you still would get on the right side of the bubble based on their overall resume. And you can read the tea leaves. The national media members that are part of this, that have definite say-so, you're seeing what happened analytically, they're all talking like they're getting in. So that's all a positive, that you would really have to probably have 3 or less wins the rest of the season to be on verge of not getting in. And depending on what happens in the country with a bubble team right now in Pitt, who they did lose to, kind of fading out, maybe they still could freaking crawl in because they have the staple wins. So again, Cody Nespor, Mike Asti here, Mountaineer Report, WVU Sports Now, for all of the coverage from that game. But again, moving forward, because we always have to talk about this, and this is always the conversation. I know DeVries never gives anything about this. Any update of any kind at all on Tucker DeVries for you, or even any change of your thoughts on Tucker DeVries? Because now there's a whole debate. I won't say who, but myself and somebody who's with the program, with the athletic program, not basketball though, had a conversation on Saturday night about kind of a dispute right now on the amount of games Tucker played and whether or not he could qualify for a red shirt or not. And that's kind of a national conversation on if they would want to do that. And there's even rumors that Iowa's job could be open, and Darren DeVries, that's his dream job. So he would go there, and they're trying to hold Tucker out to get him there and delay the NBA. And that's the whole conspiracy theory right now. Nothing of that has been concretely said, but I think it's pretty safe to say that any game they get of Tucker DeVries the rest of the year would be a bonus, because right now it appears he's not going to play. But anything new there that is not just purely speculation?
Yeah, so real quick, I get what Darren DeVries is doing. Like, he's protecting his son.
Yeah.
It does kind of suck that when you don't give anything concrete, and we've seen it for a few weeks, people talk like this, and
that's why you get what I'm saying. To be fair, that's why this happens.
If even if you just say, "Hey, this is the injury. We think it's going to be this long," like, that puts to bed a lot of this. But DeVries doesn't want to say that, so we've got to talk about this. Not this post-game press conference, and not the one after Iowa State, but the one before that.
Okay.
Somebody did just straight up ask, "Hey, is redshirting Tucker for next year? Is that like a thought at all?" And Darren basically said, "No, not at this time."
Not at this time.
He didn't say no, not ever.
Right.
Or he might have even said, like, "We're not there yet." So I think, like you said, reading the tea leaves, which is all I have to read. It sounds like the book isn't out on Tucker playing again this year, but I do think, like you said, any game you get is extra. I
think if you play him again, whether we're talking, because there's a whole debate on 8, 9, and how many minutes he's played and all that. I'll make this clear: if he plays again, you're done redshirting. I think if he plays again, you're done. Yeah. So that's why, for him to even answer it that way, I hate feeding into social media. I know you do too. I feel like this is the one example in the last 4 years of social media and burner accounts running wild, and the burner accounts have been wrong time and time again. This is the one conspiracy that I feel like has some smoke here, Cody. Mm-hmm. And even the way he answered it, that's not a coach who's saying that's just stupid. Why are you listening to that? We're not even thinking about it. That's a guy who is thinking about it, who doesn't want to do it yet, who maybe wants to leave an opening for him to come back. And who knows, if they lose 3-4 in a row and he wants to make a tournament, whether it's for the program of the Mountaineers or even for himself, if he wants another job in Darren DeVries, he wants this tournament on his resume. So maybe they bring Tucker back and say, "Tucker, you're an NBA prospect now. We're going to bring you back, and then we'll maybe try to argue the injury, but we need you on the court to win games." Mm-hmm. Or maybe they shut it down, or maybe losing makes it an easier decision where he doesn't play. I don't know, but this feels like the one conversation that, unless we get an answer, I hate to say this as a journalist, but it's almost legitimate to speculate because we have nothing else.
Yeah,
and he's the NBA prospect on the team, and they're a tournament team. This is a gigantic deal.
Yeah, and I will say, I like speculating. I hate that word too, but it's not like we're speculating what his injury is with things like that. Like, we're just talking about like strategy. What could they do? And I think that's fair because Darren won't give us anything. Like, won't give us a timetable or anything. So of course we've kind of got to just explore all the possibilities. The possibility he comes back at the very end of the year, the possibility that he's healthy enough to come back, but they hold him out to try and get this red shirt, the possibility that he's out for the year and they've known he's been out for the whole year, but they don't want to say it. And there's a little bit of gamesmanship because if you give no timetable, every opponent has to prepare like he's going to make his return. But you're right, Mike. I mean,
I think the opponents are rolling their eyes too at this point.
You were right. Like, if you can't come back from an injury and then get a red shirt for that injury,
it's not going to happen.
So if you just you can't. Right? Red shirts have to be like,
that'd be ludicrous
your whole season. So if he does come back at the end of the year, which if we're at the end of February and he's healthy enough and he gets cleared by doctors, I'd say absolutely bring him back. Let's go on a tournament run, right?
Unless you're a conspiracy theorist and they want to just drag him in next year.
Yeah, unless,
and I will say this is what's going to look really, really bad. And we've dealt with that with a lot of drama covering the West Virginia athletic program the last several years, more than most around the country. If Darren and I do believe the West Virginia. I said this to somebody when we were there on Saturday. I believe job to job, the West Virginia Mountaineers, basketball wise, is a better job when you're talking about conference history, who you would get with Joe Mazzulla, Gansey, and the connections that you would have there, even getting players into the NBA, the ability to win possibly even now, and even the increase now in NIL funding. I think it's a better job than Iowa. I do. But that's potentially going home in his dream job. But I will tell you, Cody, if we are sitting there in, I don't know, if we're sitting here in June or July or something, or earlier or later or whenever, and Darren DeVries is being introduced as the next head coach of Iowa, and then you hear the news story that they're trying to argue for this red shirt and get Tucker over to Iowa to finish out his eligibility there, I think you would then agree, if that is the hypothetical scenario, that this entire November to now situation with Darren would make him look like he was conspiring, and it would look really, really bad. I mean, it would look like, if I was Ren Baker in that was scenario, I would call him and be like, yeah, you did me dirty, and don't even call me again. Like that. That maybe it wouldn't be that, but that scenario would make this look bad. Now, the other counter to that is, if he ends up there because he wants that, fine. But if now, as you're saying, he would give us information on his son, if he would sit there now and say, I really wanted to try to bring him back, that's why I didn't tell you before, but it's probably not best for him to play the rest of the year. I still think we can go make a tournament run. I'm still going to try to win games now. Worry about the offseason later, etc. Then even if he takes another job, I don't think anybody would be that mad. You're just going home. That's what Huggins did many years ago when he left Kansas State. But we're getting no info now.
Yeah.
So if that is the scenario, then why were we getting no info?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the Iowa stuff is like picture perfect WVU fan doomerism.
No, you are correct. It's always correct. Things going very well. So what can I pick that'll make it look bad?
Yeah, it's like, everybody loves our coach. We're like the darling team in the country right now. Everybody's talking about us. But he's going to leave at the offseason.
You're right. So no. You are right, and it's a rumor. That's not reporting. That's 100% a rumor. But hypothetically, if that is the scenario, because DeVries we've seen this before. Some people would bring things up on social media, and a coach would debunk it and say it's stupid, and then it wouldn't come into fruition, and it would look stupid.
Yeah.
But this is not that. We're not seeing it debunked. So, and it almost feels like, even when I'm sitting there, Cody, it almost feels like the question that everyone knows they're not supposed to ask. And I don't mean that we're any way afraid to ask anything, because I'm asking questions that I'm sure a lot of coaches in the program don't love that I ask. Well, no matter who I've dealt with over the years, I'm not afraid to ask anything. But you know what you're going to get as your answer. And he was just asked a week earlier. So it's almost like everyone agrees, like, we're just wasting our time asking this again. He's going to give us the same answer, and he's going to be pissed about it. And then no one asks it, because, again, you just know you're not going to get anything. And that's just kind of where they are with Tucker. And you also wonder how him and Javon Small would fit in now, because Small is a different player today than he was before, even though it's only months away from each other. If Tucker comes back, does the offense go through him again? Does Small take a step back? Do they finally have a co-star thing? How does that look? Like, that's a potential conversation, but it's really looking like Tucker DeVries is not coming back. Do you think in any way they stay in the rankings? Does Kansas State matter for that?
No, because Kansas State's terrible. And I say that I love Jerome Tang. He's one of my favorite coaches in the country. They have, I believe they have the second most expensive roster behind Arkansas.
Their overall athletic program spent a lot of money. Yeah,
they're terrible this year. So no, if they beat them if West Virginia beats them by like 50, maybe they hang on at number 25 or something. Or maybe if there's just a bunch of other upsets. But no, they're not they're not staying in the rankings after that.
Do you have anything else from the men's side? We'll talk a little bit of women's before closing up shop here.
I think you mentioned like could Tucker and Javon play together? Yeah, I think Tucker would be the perfect off-ball second option for Javon. Like still,
Would
use
he be that?
Javon.
Would he be that?
Um,
Tucker was the first option entering the season, and he's the guy that clearly his dad wants in the NBA.
yeah.
Would they do that? Would that hurt his
Um,
value? Would they do that?
nah, because like if you think about like the Arizona game in the Bahamas, that's kind of what he did. Like
I
he
guess
obviously
so.
he handles the ball a lot. Well, in West Virginia needs a second ball handler too.
You're right.
So like that would fill all the roles. I lost my train of thought. What was I talking about?
Yeah, just how they would fit together.
Yeah, I mean, they would be like,
and they would, but it would just be
yeah.
interesting how they would look. I think Small's a different player now than he was around Thanksgiving.
Well, let's like right now, one of West Virginia's best offensive actions is Hansberry and Small in a ball screen, because defense is always focused on Javon. So Amani's been wide open for threes, or he rolls to the hoop sometimes. Imagine if that's Tucker and Javon in the ball screen. Like with pick your poison. Even though Tucker
maybe he
really
could pick it up when you're off against Arizona State.
Yeah,
for
and
example,
like
he's a little bigger, like maybe that would have been a different result.
Yeah, and Javon needs some time to play off ball. Like the last two games, there've been maybe 10 combined possessions where he's playing off the ball. He needs to do it more, just because it makes the defense have to change because they can't double him if he's staying in the corner. But yeah, I mean, someone of Tucker's quality, every team in the country would would love to add him.
Yeah, that would be a nice trade acquisition that you'd be making before the postseason run. But again, I think any game he does play probably is a bonus, and you probably have to go into every game figuring you're not getting Tucker DeVries. Here's the strategy without him. That's probably what they're figuring. That's probably what the opponents are figuring. That's just what fans need to figure as well. And that does kind of suck, but it is amazing to where they are even without Tucker DeVries, and that only adds more fodder for Darren DeVries to be a coach of the year, whether it be Big 12 or national. Again, I do want to actually quickly ask that. So once again, Bobby Hurley mentioned he should win Big 12 Coach of the Year. We've seen that before after the Houston game. If he doesn't win anything that any coaches are voting for, that'd be a knee slapper because clearly they're all big fans of Darren DeVries and saying they're all going to vote for him. Is this all but wrapped up? Or can he putter that? Can he putter that away at least for the conference? National is a whole different story, obviously, with some other coaches winning a lot of games as well. But is this just his to lose right now? And the schedule is easy enough the rest of the way that even if they split, is Darren DeVries still the Big 12 Coach of the Year based on what he's done so far under the circumstances?
Yeah. Maybe the Pac-12 was a lot more friendly, and the coaches were complimented because Tommy Lloyd and Bobby Hurley, like unprompted, both major praise on Darren. I mean, like the thought experiment I always do for stuff like this is like, if not Darren DeVries, who is the Big 12 Coach of the Year right now? Right. Kelvin Sampson, I guess. TJ Otzelberger.
Kelvin Sampson. It could be him every year, though.
It would be, Otzelberger would be probably my next pick behind Darren. Not Bill Self this year.
No.
Nobody else really. So like, we have a coach who straight up says, "Yeah, I'm voting for him." So I do think it's Darren's. I think it's Darren's award to lose. And like I said, unless Iowa State. I don't know if the coaches vote before or after the Big 12 tournament. I think they vote before. So like, what
somebody would have to make a run in the tournament to
I was gonna say, like what could,
it doesn't matter, right?
What could Iowa State do from now to the end of the regular season that would put him ahead of DeVries?
Right.
I don't know. So the only thing would be is if West Virginia collapses and kind of falls out of the national conversation.
If they really are in a tournament team because they've lost so many games in a row despite the big wins, then maybe that would have to take it from him because you generally want that team that coach to be in March Madness in some capacity.
Yeah.
But that would again be a big collapse because the schedule outside of Houston is favorable the rest of the way. They might even be literally favored in most of those games. So we will see. To the women, though, that's another team on the rise. They are now winning big game. JJ Quinterly really now becoming the player they wanted her to be all year that could carry them to a special season, but their expectations are sky high, and they got kind of screwed seed-wise last year, which hurt them from being able to get to a Sweet 16. Actually, Cody, this would be the first time if they get to one this year, the program would get there with the expanded tournament with the amount of teams that are in it now, because the 92 Sweet 16, you only had 32 teams in the women's tournament at that time. How do you think the women are playing right now in terms of the national conversation? If somebody says they're a dark horse Final Four team, is that asinine to you, or is that a real possibility? And how's the rest of the season look for you on the women's side?
I think last week was really good for them. It just feels like they've got their mojo back. That fourth quarter against Colorado, they carried that into that, a really big, important Iowa State game, really, because that's a good women's team with obviously Audi Crooks is probably the best center in the league, and she terrorized them here last year in the matchup. And West Virginia just really, I won't say easy game, but they played great. They won pretty comfortably. And it just feels like this team, they had a couple weeks where they were off. So, something was wrong. They were not struggling, but like everything was harder than it should be. And like it just seems like that fourth quarter against Colorado. I'm sure it was a confidence thing too. They're just they've got their mojo back. They're playing how they want to play. In like I said, that Iowa State game was just great for them. And if they're able to keep this rolling, like it's easy to see them getting back up into the teens in the top 25, and then come March, hopefully they get a really good seed, and depending on what region they're in and who else in that region, it's I wouldn't say Final Four, but it's easy to project them because when they face lower level teams,
I think it's fair to say though the Sweet 16 is the bar they got to get to. I mean, they were right before last year with Caitlin Clark. And one thing I also will say about this year that's not been brought up yet, and we'll see where the national ratings are, and obviously people are still watching the women's game. You don't have Caitlin Clark, you don't have Angel Reese, you have Juju, but there's not as many singularly dominant individuals in the women's game this year. There are still some. Before we get any comments, there are not as many. There are about half as many as there were a season ago. And that's just the elite bar of them. And in the women's game, we usually see the best individual player usually has a team at minimum in the Final Four. The path usually takes them at minimum there. And then national championship, just a different story. South Carolina being the best team, they were able to do it. But with there being fewer individually elite players, arguably more teams are vulnerable than ever before. UConn, etc. They're vulnerable. They certainly can lose. They're not going to steamroll anybody like years past. You could argue this is the most wide open year for a program that's not done it to do it. And if any program who's not done it can do it because they have a good enough team, player, and coach with experience, that again would be West Virginia. But I would argue that the seed line's more important in the women's game than even in the men's game, because as we saw last year, if you end up in a situation where you're playing the one in round 2, that's rough. Whereas if you even tweak that seed line a little bit, you avoid it, and then you have a path open. That screwed them last year. So to what you're saying, I don't think it's insane. I don't know if I'd put money Final Four, but I would say it is fair that if they don't win an NCAA tournament game, or they lose in round 2, but say they're a 4 seed and they're not playing the 1, or they don't get to a Sweet 16, or even if they lose there, little disappointment. I'm not in any way I'm not going to use the word failure because it's year 2, and obviously they're a very good team. But I think people need to understand disappointment and failure are different words. That's disappointment. I think Mark Kellogg would sit there in the post-game presser if they're losing round 2 saying, I am unhappy with this season. Because that's the end of Quinterly. And then you could argue that right now, from what we're seeing, and they're still recruiting, etc., the success was supposed to be this year more than even last year when it was year 1, and probably even more than next year. I'm sure Ren Baker's thinking in his mind, this is the year that got to go far. Next year's up in the air. So they do have pressure to get it done, and their remaining schedule, by the way, compared to the men's, a little tougher. Little tougher. They're in a better spot. Little tougher though. They have the Arizona State game coming up as we're speaking here. So we're in front of that here on Wednesday. By the time you're listening, that game is probably over. But saying they win that game, Arizona, Oklahoma State, Kansas, Houston, Baylor, Cincinnati. They do play TCU, who right now is ranked 9th in the AP, Kansas State ranked 10th. Those are end-of-year games, so they do have 3 more games against teams that are also ranked in Baylor, Kansas State, and TCU towards the end of the season. There are a lot of winnable games in there, but they play 3 more ranked teams at minimum as the rankings stand right now. So they could have 1 or 2 more losses. That would not surprise me, and that could move them right where they were last year seed-wise again.
Yeah, and it's it was funny last year. Like you could have picked 3 of the 4 Final Four teams, after the first game, before the first game, right? Like Iowa, LSU,
100%. LSU,
Iowa,
Iowa,
South Carolina.
Everyone, even if you don't follow the sport, those 3 pencil them in. 100%.
This year, you're absolutely right. I wouldn't really feel great about locking any one team into a Final Four right now. Like you mentioned, Juju Watkins. Yeah, USC is good. She's really good. Paige at UConn's really good.
They look more vulnerable than ever before. Yeah, when USC hasn't done it with Juju yet.
Yeah, but like I think there's a really great parity on the women's side this year that, as much as, Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark, they drove all of that excitement and it was awesome. And nobody would say that wasn't awesome. I think it's as a casual kind of, I'll flip on a game. It is kind of fun to see like, any of the top teams can lose. And this isn't just this isn't a foregone conclusion what the Final Four is going to look like. The dream for WVU is obviously get a high enough seed. You get to host the regional or the whatever it's called.
That's a dream scenario, 100%. Yeah, at least better seed than last year, but being able to host is a whole different story. Yeah,
and I think you're right. I think a good bar is not making the Sweet 16 last year was disappointing, right? Like because they had
you
Iowa.
can excuse it a little bit because of Iowa. Yeah,
but they had. They were there. They had Iowa on the ropes. They took them down to the wire. Everybody knows
they would have beat anybody else. They would have beat anybody else.
Everybody knows how the officiating in that game was. But
and I don't want to. I don't want to go that they're trying to rig it for them. But they did. They wanted Iowa to get every break. That's part of being at home, and they wanted to have what you're saying, the Angel Reese, Caitlin Clark, one more time. They wanted to try to do that. Caitlin Clark didn't win a ring, but they wanted to try to get her a chance at one. They didn't want it tripped up in round 2 by any means. That's why you got to avoid, though. It is a little bit their fault because they dropped some games at this point in the year that forced them into that seed line. If they would have won those games, they might have been able to avoid Caitlin Clark, and then at least they're in the Sweet 16. That is what I'm saying, even if you think that game was officiated unfairly.
Yeah, and you mentioned, this is JJ's last year. I haven't given this too much thought, but it is like she's becoming, a top 5 player in program history. I mean, you look at career scoring, she's right up there. She's right up there with all the best. Like the impact she's made, the number of wins she has. She's going to be in the tournament every year of her career. I can't remember if she would have made it her very first year. But
I mean, the end of Carey, no, but then she did make with Don P.
But then Dunklets
she wasn't the top player within the Don P year. Right. You could argue that.
But like, I do think it would be disappointing to just win one or no games in the tournament with
100%
a player that's leaving a legacy at the school. And
Markella just said she's a WNBA prospect. He literally just said it.
I was going to bring up a player that's going to very clearly have a shot in the pros. And another thing, I'll give praise to JJ real quick.
Yeah,
she stayed. It's easier than ever to just jump ship and go anywhere you want. And she's gone
3 coaches.
Three. I was going to say 2 coaching changes, 3 coaching staffs.
Yeah.
The coach that recruited her was gone. The coach that replaced him was gone. And this new guy came in, and she stayed and just played her heart out for the school.
Drama all the way through the damn switches. I mean, Carey didn't really want to go. There was under the radar drama there. Don P was lying on when she told players, and there was drama there. And JJ stayed. And Mark Hellig even talked about the beginning of last season. He admitted he had to convince her. But to your point, she could have easily went elsewhere. And even if last year she didn't have the value she has now, after last year, she could have said, I'll ride it out at UConn and win a ring, but as a lower tier player. But no,
so like
she stayed, and she's going to be a WVU Sports Hall of Famer, I would say.
Yeah. So like we're talking about, again, I haven't looked into it, so I don't want to say definitive, but one of the most important players in program history, certainly she's becoming that. Absolutely. Like if you go one and done in the tournament, that's disappointing. If you win one game and then lose in the second round, that's disappointing. You make it to a Sweet 16, that's awesome. Anything else is gravy. We're happy we got here. This is, a huge moment for the program. We're going to hang a banner up for it, and we're sending her out the right way. Great. I do think anything less than that, you are going to be a little disappointed at the end of the year.
Yeah, I am going to definitively say that anything shy of a Sweet 16 is a disappointment this year. We'll see how the season unfolds and how the games unfold, and the seed line matters. Yep. But that absolutely is a fair bar based on last year and how close they were. And I also do feel if they played literally anyone else, with the exception of South Carolina and maybe LSU, in round 2, they would have absolutely got to a Sweet 16 at minimum. And at that point, you are facing elite teams, but it is more wide open this year than ever before. And Cody, we might be sitting there with them in the Sweet 16 looking at that matchup and saying, they should win that one too. Like once they're there, Final Four, maybe you're getting into, 5-star recruits all through the board. But even Sweet 16, they might be talent-wise. I don't know if everyone's going to have JJ there. So it depends on who you're playing and if you're avoiding Juju, if you're avoiding Paige, etc. But I do think they have enough of a resume that they're not going to get screwed like maybe they were last year, as long as they don't crater. So I think 16 is a fair thing. And I will say, to kind of the flip and, a positive spin on what you're saying there on how disappointing it would be if they do lose right away. I mean, JJ Quinterly is probably a Hall of Famer nonetheless for the program, and we'll have her, portrait up there on the Coliseum. But if they go the Sweet 16, the only other Sweet 16 on the women's side is when they had less teams in the tournament way back in the early 90s. Despite Carrie's success and even the tournament appearances and a lot of tournament appearances, but not much postseason play success once in March. You could absolutely argue the greatest women's team in program history. And then I'm not saying she's the best individual player looking at the numbers of the others and knowing their games, but then she's going to get into that rarefied air as she was the very best player, the leader on the team that went the furthest with the most in front of her. She would get really celebrated, and then we'll see what they do with the banner, because they got 3 big ones and a bunch of small ones at the Coliseum, and there's been success on both sides. We'll see if they give them a big banner if they go to the Final Four or something else. So a lot is in front of this team, and the schedule certainly still allows them to have success. But if they lose 3 out of 4 or 2 out of 4 when they play ranked teams to end the year, you know what's going to happen. They're an NCAA tournament team lock right now for sure. They might even still be ranked because those are all quality teams. A couple of them are in the top 10. They absolutely will get on the verge of playing a number 1 seed in round 2 again. That could be another scenario. That they got important games, even though they're a lock for the NCAA tournament, because what they want is more than an appearance. I mean, I would say once you're in the NCAA tournament on the men's side, you're playing with house money. It's year 1 of Darren DeVries. With the women, they got pressure. They're not. I mean, they cannot go one and done, or then it is a major disappointment after winning a game last year. Doesn't mean Kellogg's a bad coach, but it would be viewed as a major disappointment. And we'll see moving forward. That'll do it for this edition of the show. Hit up the show here on YouTube. Click the notification bell whenever we are on, or whenever there are post-game pressers for any of these coaches or players, etc. Also find us everywhere you get your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, Google Play, etc. there. And then, of course, WV Sports Now for all of our coverage of the women. And, of course, tons of football recruiting, slowing down a little bit, moving into high school recruiting. And then we'll get to spring ball and then everything else. Baseball season not far away as well. So WV Sports Now for all of our coverage on the site.